All right, welcome everyone. Let's be honest, getting that item analysis report can feel, well, a bit like being handed a page of hieroglyphics, right? All those numbers and acronyms. But what if I told you it's actually your best friend for building better, fairer, and more effective exams? That's exactly what we're going to tackle today.
So, let's totally reframe how we look at this thing. Instead of a report card on your question writing skills, think of it as a diagnostic tool, a patient chart, if you will, for every single item on your exam. Our goal here is to learn how to read that chart and turn every number into a clear, actionable insight.
First things first, let's look at the 3 vital signs for your correct answer, what the report calls the key. These are really the core metrics that tell us if a question is fundamentally healthy or if it needs some attention.
Okay, our first stat is the p-value, which is just the proportion of students who got the question right. Now, here's a heads up. In all of our clinical research, we are trained to love a low p-value, right? Well, for item analysis, you have to completely flip that thinking on its head.
So this is absolutely crucial to remember. It's an inverse relationship. A high p-value, say 0.95, doesn't mean your finding is insignificant. It means 95% of your students got it right. It was an easy question. On the flip side, a low p-value of, say, 0.15 means it was a really tough one that only 15% of students answered correctly.
And this gives us some really practical benchmarks. Look, a question above 0.80 is perfectly fine if you're just testing foundational, must-know recall. But for the bulk of your exam, you really want your questions living in that sweet spot between 0.30 and 0.80. Anything below 0.20, that's a potential red flag, something we definitely need to investigate further.
All right, let's move on to our next vital sign, the discrimination index, or simply D. This stat gets right to the heart of what a good question should do. Does it actually work? Does it separate the students who've mastered the material from those who are still struggling? To do that, the report compares how the top 27% of students did on this one item versus the bottom 27%.
So just think of it this way. Your students who did best on the exam overall should, logically, get this specific question right more often than the students who did poorly on the exam. The D value just puts a number on that difference.
And here's our goal. We're aiming for a D value of 0.30 or higher. That tells you, hey, this question is doing its job. If you see a value below 0.10 or even worse, a negative number, Houston, we have a problem. That means the question might actually be favoring your lower performing students, which is a major diagnostic concern we need to address. Okay, our final core statistic for the correct answer is the point by serial, or RPB. Now, it's pretty similar to the discrimination index, but it gives us a slightly different and, I think, a very powerful piece of the puzzle. While D only looks at the top and bottom groups, the point by serial looks at every single student who took the test.
It's really a measure of internal consistency. It's asking a very simple, very logical question. Does getting this one item right correlate with getting a high score on the exam as a whole? For a good question, the answer should be a resounding yes. And here are the benchmarks for that. We're really hoping to see 0.20 or higher. A weak positive value, somewhere between 0 and 0.19, warrants a closer look. But a negative number? Whoa, that is a 5-alarm fire. That's the report screaming at you that your top-performing students are actually more likely to get this question wrong. This almost always points to a seriously flawed question or a simple mistake in the answer key.
Okay, so we've thoroughly diagnosed the health of our correct answer. But a great question is only as good as its wrong answers, what we call the distractors. Now we get to dive into the art and science of writing the perfect wrong answer.
So the key and the distractors have totally opposite jobs. The correct answer, the key, is designed to attract your high-scoring students, giving it that nice, positive point B serial. A good distractor, on the other hand, should look really plausible, but only if you have a common misconception about the topic. Its job is to attract the lower-scoring students, which means it should have a negative point B serial.
So let's put all of this together. We're going to look at a couple of common patient profiles that you'll see over and over again in your reports. Once you learn to spot these patterns, you can confidently diagnose your own items in no time.
Here it is, case number 1 and probably the most critical one to spot, the miss key. Let's look at the symptoms. The p-value for what you thought was the key is low. And look at this, the discrimination and the point by serial for the key are both negative. But then one of your distractors has a positive point by serial. The data here is telling you a very clear story.
Your best students, the ones who know this stuff cold, are systematically avoiding your so-called correct answer, and they're picking something else instead. In fact, that other option is actually behaving like the real key.
The treatment plan here is pretty straightforward. First, just go check your answer key. Was it a simple typo? It happens. If not, take a hard look at that popular distractor. Is it also a defensible answer? Maybe based on new guidelines or a nuance you missed. From there, you just take action. Either correct the key in the system, or if both answers are plausible, award credit for both. Easy fix.
All right, our next case is a little more subtle. The key itself might look totally fine with good stats, but one of the distractors is causing trouble. You can see here this distractor is pretty popular, and, more importantly, it has a positive point biserial and a positive discrimination index.
See, a distractor with a positive RPB is what we call a non-performing distractor. It's failing at its job. Instead of catching students with common misconceptions, it's actually tricking your high-performing students. It's just introducing noise and ambiguity into the question, which undermines its validity.
So the plan here is surgical. You don't have to throw out the whole question. Just isolate that one flawed distractor and really try to figure out why it's so tempting to your best students. Then you can either rewrite it or just replace it entirely with an option that better targets a real, known misconception.
So after going through all that, how do you put this into practice quickly and efficiently? Let's boil it all down to a final practical checklist that you can use to triage every single question on your report.
For every single item, just run down this list. Is the difficulty in that sweet spot? Is it discriminating well? Does the key have a strong positive point biserial? And, just as important, do all of the distractors have a negative one? If you can check yes on these, chances are you've got a really solid, high-quality question.
And there you have it. You now have the tools to look at that report not with dread, but with genuine curiosity. You can turn this whole process from a chore into a really powerful, data-driven way to improve your assessments and ultimately improve student learning. The only question left is, which item are you going to put on the examination table first?